bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends, and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. There's rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a knife, just to give in to the need and leave it all behind. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker.
And because we're late, I'm going to go ahead and start the show early and kill the music. So if you love Bad Habit, I apologize for that. But it's 11:08 and I want to get into this. You know what? I'm just going to bring the guys on. Real quick show announcements. Locals, we're going to have a live stream in between this episode and the next episode because I didn't get to go over California as much detail as I'd like. So we're going to talk about that. All right. So today I got the guys from the Gaggle. I got Peter and George from the Gaggle. If you missed the show that I did with them, go back and look at it. It was great. It was just great conversation. And with everything going on with Afghanistan, I really wanted to have them on, like we talked about. And basically, if I'll let them speak for themselves. But let me bring them on. All right, let's let the thing go through here. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Thanks so much for joining the show today and your patience. Normally, I'd have this worked out an hour before, but got a generator going in because it's hurricane season and because everything's falling apart in the world. So I'm installing. So they're making a prepper out of me, gentlemen. They're making a prepper out of me. How are you guys doing this morning?
Pretty good. Well, it's morning for you, not quite morning for us.
That's right. Late morning.
Yeah.
I don't know who wants to start first. Let's throw it to Peter first. I want both your thoughts on generally what's going on out there. It's like politics, and I'll just lead it with this. Politics is funny. Academia typically jives with media and the forum and the establishment in DC and in other countries. But in foreign policy, that is not the case. In foreign policy, neoconservatism, neoliberalism, they're jokes of schools of thought. And in academia, you're laughed out of the classroom. You can't even defend a thesis. What are your thoughts on what's going on now? Because this is a product of that. 20 years of ignoring that. What's your thoughts, Peter? Start with you.
Well, we're seeing the culmination of 20 years of incompetence. Okay, that's it. And my thoughts are, obviously the optics are awful, but George and I have talked about this at a great deal, and I don't see that it would have been a whole lot different. Now, getting the military out before the civilians, well, that's obviously somebody didn't think this out. However, I'll say something that probably isn't very popular, is that a lot of those Americans are there for six-figure jobs working for NGOs. Okay, I mean, this I'm sorry, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's part of the grift. It's part of the grift. Okay. I mean, on all levels. Okay. This was the biggest jobs program since the New Deal, except for it was in a foreign country. Okay. And so when the trough was running dry, they should have just, collected their money and got out. Now, I don't want to see anyone hurt, harmed, or killed. Obviously, I don't. But the writing, as soon as the Doha Agreement was signed, the writing was on the wall. Make plans, folks.
No, I think that's I think that's right. I think that was in February 2020, and therefore there was quite a lot of time to prepare. And above all, you have to wonder what on earth was the U.S. military doing all of this time. Remember, we're talking about months when they should have been making preparations for obviously the evacuation of military personnel, but obviously, the evacuation of Americans, and there seem to be an awful lot of them, far in excess of the numbers that we had believed, who were in Afghanistan. So you have to wonder, well, what were you doing? I mean, there's Milley obsessing about January the 6th. There's Milley fighting against Trump, delivering interviews about how he was very troubled about accompanying Trump to that church and clearing out Lafayette Square Park. But he's not doing what he's paid to do, which is to be organizing the evacuation of the military, because that's exactly what he should have been doing, figuring out how to do it and to do it in as expeditiously as possible. And he wasn't doing it. So, yes, it's a chaotic exit. The exit had to be done. I mean, I think Biden's policy was correct, but it's down to the absolute disgraceful incompetence of the U.S. military in what has happened.
Let me ask you this.
This is no surprise.
Go ahead.
This is no surprise. This is what the military has been all about, particularly since the end of the Cold War. Okay, this is what they do is politics right now. They don't do war fighting at all here. And one thing that really makes me angry, George and I have talked about this, is that they're all finding a way to stay in. I mean, that's the underlying thing. You keep hearing it, okay? Well, if we just do this and we do that, and then they never talk, well, that could take 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, another year. I mean, you see this on Fox News, which I find very, very irritating, okay? Yeah. I find it monstrously wrong, okay? Now, Biden is an incompetent person. He's been his entire life. If you knew anything about him, he's an incompetent person. And he has incompetent people around him. And that's why this is working out the way it is. But there are people that with this very malicious attitude are looking for a way. Laura Logan, if you watch her, that's her message.
Yeah.
Oh, and go ahead. It looks like we lost Peter. That's all right. I'll bring him back when he's...
Okay. And I think that if you look at the articles that have appeared, particularly in the Wall Street Journal, where you've had Paul Wolfowitz, and then you had Peggy Noonan, and then you had the Wall Street Journal editorials, which are talking about how to stay on and how to prolong the expedition, to evacuate more and more people, or at least somehow to justify staying on there, and presumably to resume the fighting against the Taliban. So it is quite extraordinary that even after this 20-year failure, there's still this drumbeat for prolonging the stay, and it's just an extraordinary. I mean, I don't know whether you saw this report, this Inspector General report on Afghan Afghan reconstruction, and there's a
cigar.
Yeah, the cigar, exactly. And it's just worth reading what he says there. He says here that because the Taliban has been ascendant on the battlefield for more than a decade, it was poorly motivated to indulge peace talks beyond what was necessary to secure the release of more than 5,000 prisoners, ensure the removal of UN sanctions, accrue international legitimacy, and claim credit for negotiating the departure of US forces. And it says that, notably, none of those objectives required compromise with the Afghan government, and said the Taliban thought they were just there in Doha to discuss the terms of the government's surrender. They said, we don't need to talk to you, we can just take over. So in other words, they already knew this was everyone in the U.S. government already knew that this was over. That there's no point in resuscitating this war. It's gone. It's lost. But this message doesn't seem to have penetrated the mind.
George, George, the Taliban are saying, what are you still here for?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why are you here?
Saying.
You won't hear that on Fox News. You won't hear that on Fox News. You just won't. I mean, there are senators and congressmen still talking right now about, well, maybe we need more troops to send it back to make sure that we can secure this. At this point, yesterday he had no choice when he said he would not extend the August 31st deadline. He had no choice. He was just setting himself up for more stupidity and failure because they said, no, gentlemen, it's over. So, what is he going to do? Start an entirely new conflict? I mean, this is when the war started, the minute they left Bagram, that was it. That was a sign to go get the rest of the country, because Bagram is the one fortress. It took multiple Ranger battalions and ODA teams on the ground with lasers. I mean, this is what I'm like listening to these people on television, and they just had no idea what it took to take this territory the first time and what it would take now. We would have to mobilize all of that all over again. I mean, this is just to me absolutely absurd. But it's textbook of, like Peter said, Biden has been a failure his entire life. Why did we expect anything different?
Well, don't you find it remarkable? And George and I have discussed this. For the last 5 years, what has the American public been told about Afghanistan? Nothing. Yeah. Nothing. Then all of a sudden, it's the most important story. 5 minutes ago, it became the most important story. When, if you've been paying attention, this day was etched in stone.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, it's been obvious. And the statistics are quite stunning about how little attention the media paid. I mean, these numbers, virtually, about 2 minutes a year on Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now suddenly everyone obsesses about it, and everyone purports to be an expert on Afghanistan. But in fact, no one really asked any of the questions that needed asking. So you would have all the generals that come down to Capitol Hill. How's it going, General? Thank you for your service. Everything is going great. Well, thank you very much, General. Thank you again for your service. And that's it. And then, none of the people.
And then write a check.
Exactly. None of the people inquired into, well, what kind of progress are you making? And it's clear from this report that they all knew that the Taliban wasn't making progress. After the initial defeat in 2001, the Taliban has been steadily making a comeback, and the Afghan government forces were absolutely useless, couldn't fight without the Americans, and they all knew that there was just no way that they would ever be able to cope without American firepower. And
another thing, stranded in Kabul, maybe. Where are the hostage videos? Okay, where's the hostage videos of the Taliban holding Americans? If logic dictates, they want them to get out. I don't see why they would impede American citizens from leaving.
Would it look
good? They want you out. You promised to leave.
Would it look good on their application to the United Nations if they started gunning down Westerners? Now, people they think are heretics who may have helped the West.
That's different.
That's totally different. Yeah, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. What do you think of the West collectively? What do you think our obligation is? These numbers I hear on TV, guys, there aren't 50,000 Afghanis who put their lives on the line as translators. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, there are people who helped with diplomacy. There are, of course, translators. But some of the stuff I hear is just nuts. And the media is like rapidly protecting this wave of migration that they want to bring to the West. You said there was no reporting on Afghanistan when it really should have been a story. There's no reporting right now on what we're doing with these refugees. We're just blindly taking them, and we're not having, which, are uncomfortable. but serious conversations about what that can mean for American and other Western communities. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's
Go ahead,
exactly
George.
it. I mean, that's these numbers are getting larger and larger, and so we have
Yep.
this airlift, and the U.S. government boasts, oh, we got 4,000 or 5,000 people out today. And so if you're going to start taking out 5,000, and that's just the military aircraft, and then they get the civilian aircraft involved, you are talking about an awful lot of people that you're shipping out. You have no idea who any of these people are. They're not people with any documentation. They're not. They can't really trace them as to who exactly they are. What did they do for the U.S. government? Why they need protection? So you're bringing them in, and then once they're out, then there's no way of sending them back in because whatever even if you find that this person is a terrorist and the worst kind of criminal, he's going to say, hey, you send me back, I'm facing the death sentence. That's it. So you can't send a person back if he's facing the death sentence, which means that they stay on forever. And that's really been the problem with the Afghan crime wave throughout Europe, is that basically the governments of Europe are unable to get rid of them because they don't work the legal system in Europe, and they know how to work it. And ultimately, even this person's a child rapist. He's done this horrible things here. And we want to get rid of him. He said, no, because you send me back to Afghanistan, I'm facing the death penalty. So basically, you're obligated to just keep them on there forever.
Also,
Go ahead, Peter.
Look at the optics of all. Look at the optics of this. A failed war for 20 years. $2 trillion wasted. Never will be held to account, ever. So what are the optics now? The mono war party, look how successfully we got out hundreds of thousands of Afghanistans. Look at those beautiful planes. We have such a big heart. We took care of these people. They want to change the narrative. They don't want any accountability for what has happened here whatsoever. And the claim that the way this is being done without consulting NATO allies. Remember, everyone, this was a NATO operation, okay? It was NATO that was there. And all of these NATO countries, and it was after 9/11 where Article 5 of the NATO Charter was invoked, one is attacked, we all come together. And so, NATO is saying, they're proving what George and I have been saying for years. It's a completely useless organization. Yep. And now they pay in spades. They're taking these people in the same countries where courts are trying to get rid of Afghan refugees.
Right. And the point about this is so ridiculous. I mean, we had that G7 online meeting yesterday, and you had these countries telling Biden, well, you've got to stay on, you've got to go beyond the August the 31st deadline. And then he said, nah, we're just leaving on August the 31st. Well, if Great Britain wants to go back into Afghanistan and fight the Taliban, no one is stopping him. No one is stopping Emmanuel Macron from going back in. So the whole idea that they're trying to berate the United States, what are you doing leaving so early? You've got to get more people out. Well, you do it. And so therefore, of course, they're not going to do it. I mean, they've always just been hiding behind the United States. I mean, the idea that this is sort of a partnership is a joke. But it's ridiculous that they now pose as somehow, well, we're more ready to fight than the Americans, the cowardly, sniveling Americans. I mean, it's a joke. No one is stopping Britain going back in if they really, really want to fight the Taliban.
George, I heard the Germans just the other day. It was a horrible story. They had it all over their media. And I knew we were going to hear stories like this. The German army says, the Americans promised they would have our back. They would give us more notice than this. I looked this man in the eye and I told him we would not leave him behind. You know the stories. What happened to the guy? Sadly, I mean, he was murdered. It looks like his family, and we got Peter back. That's great. Looks like his family is not going to fare well, George. I mean, we knew these stories were coming, but at the same time, who the hell is stopping Angela Merkel and the Germans from going in and doing something about it?
Exactly. That's exactly it. If you really want to do it, and if you're so disgusted with wimpiness, then we're fine. Go
Well,
for it.
but
No
see,
one's stopping you. But of course, it's a
why are
joke
they
that,
angry, guys?
all of
Why are they angry?
these claims
Because
that Europeans are now making. Well, we've now got to start thinking about our own interests and stop worrying about the Americans. We're going to
Right.
do this and this and this. Come on. I mean, Europe hasn't done any military adventurism for decades, not since the imperial times. And the few times they've tried anything, it's always been an absolute fiasco. Remember the Giscard d'Estaing in the 1970s? Oh, France is going to have all these military missions in Africa. It is a joke. I mean, Macron is in Sahel. What the hell are they doing in Sahel? I mean, they're not achieving anything. But so this is such a pretense that now we're going to have those Europeans engaging in serious military ventures because we can't rely on the Americans.
Peter, this really, because you guys have been great on the United Nations. You have been NATO, excuse me, which was always an argument I made during the Trump era. He ran to Germany, and and he said you got to pay your fair share of GDP. You remember that in the military, the foreign policy establishment had a total canary over that, and the truth was that of course they had to say yes to Donald Trump. It was a joke that they ever had a bargaining chip to begin with. NATO isn't real. It's obsolete. It's us, or the United States largely. It's obsolete. The Warsaw Pact is gone, Peter. It's gone. The point of NATO was to be a balancing coalition against the Warsaw Pact. Now we live in a very different era. Terrorism, we have very different threats, very different coalitions that we have to balance against other nations that are trying to bandwagon on different balancing coalitions. And is this not really the product of just not moving into the 21st century? I mean, seriously. That's to you, Peter. Oh, did he, you can't hear him either, George, right?
I don't know, is he muted or?
Yeah, I think you're muted, Peter. Oh, you can hear me? I can't hear you.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can
Can you
hear
hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, well, look,
and you heard my question,
thought
right? Yeah.
Yes. Before I fade out again, why are they so angry about the pullout? I'll tell you why.
I don't hear him, so.
Okay.
I do.
George, go to the microphone button in the top. Okay. All right. Well, let me get my answer out.
Yeah, go ahead.
Why are they so upset about this? Is because NATO has grand ambitions.
Yeah.
And all this is like put a huge stop into the whole thing because what they're putting China on notice, okay, and we're going to bring in Venezuela, we're going to bring in Colombia and Ecuador, and and Japan might join. And see, this is showing. Oh, I mean, even this job where the U.S. did all of the heavy lifting. And now the U.S. is saying, we're not going to pay for this anymore. It's a very unpopular war. And the Europeans are saying, but we had our ambitions. George was right before I faded out. They haven't had imperial ambitions for a century now. And now they want to get back into the game. And the whole Afghan fiasco debacle is really put a stop to that, which I'm really quite pleased because it shows that this whole alliance is just a fraud.
It's a total joke. It's a total and complete joke. And just I'm looking at the polling as just we caught the beginning, the tip, I think, in the poll that we released at the Monday after this really fell apart. The country fell apart. And it completely reversed. It was 47 approved, 51 disapproved. But you could see it really on the way down. Now survey USA Today yesterday, 41%. They're trying to make this about whether he should have pulled out or not, when really it's about confidence in their philosophy to begin with. Because Americans in that survey are overwhelmingly in agreement that they didn't want to be in Afghanistan. It's the philosophy. It's this worldview that they keep basing their policy on that is not true. It's a fantasy. And they just don't want to accept it. And every time I just heard before we came on, little clips from the Pentagon. And these people are in complete denial about reality, and it scares reasonable people, including myself, because like you said, the U.S. has been the leader, and now there's just nobody. It's like a rudderless ship. There's nobody at the helm here. What are your thoughts on that, George? I
But
mean,
one thing,
who's? Or go ahead, Peter. You
I
go
think
ahead.
it's. I think you have a very good point there, and he is showing himself obviously in over his head, and clearly it's an administration that is unable to communicate a message. But it also goes back to what you were saying last time, which is that Biden had kind of for 7 months now, I guess, he's kind of been gliding on the surface because of COVID. And he's enjoyed a kind of a support in the
Yep.
opinion polls that he didn't really deserve.
Yep.
And so now with this Afghan thing, I think he's in a free fall because this is not something that can be arrested. It's not like, oh well, this will be over and then we'll move on to the next, because ultimately he's now basically just he's got nothing much going for him. The COVID isn't really working for him, and now he's been exposed by in this Afghanistan thing, but he's just clearly not up to the job. 41%, according to this USA Today poll yesterday, and all of the other polls are clearly showing he is underwater. I don't think that he's going to recover from this. Even 2-3
Yeah.
months, maybe Afghanistan will be ancient history. I don't think that he can recover in the polls.
Peter, why don't you
I think-
finish your thought before I ask you a question? Go ahead. I know you wanted to say something.
well, I think it's very important to keep in mind that Joe Biden was supposed to be safe hands. Remember, he was supposed to bring the adults in the room. All right. And so George and I have been thinking about this for the last couple of weeks, is that when Joe Biden faltered for the national security state, then CNN went after him. It was really quite interesting.
Yeah.
So even people say he gets a free pass because he's not Trump. Well, there's some truth to that. But at the end of the day, he's supposed to keep the ideology in place and protection of those that want to pursue these forever wars. And that's why you even have some of his traditional allies questioning it. Because what they do is, they don't want to question interventionist behavior. They want to question, do you get all the children out of the airport? But that's the subtext here. The real thing is that he's, you're screwing this up. This is the way we do things, because a lot of people make a lot of money off of it. Look, for example, George will know this example. Yanukovych, when he fled for his life in 2014, he took millions and millions and millions of dollars. Well, at the end of the day, there was none. He didn't steal. Maybe he stole something, but it wasn't what people.
Oh, well, we lost him. We lost him again, George. That was a damn good point, too. That's a shame. That was a damn good point. But let me just ask you, is this going to, whether he recovers or not, is it going to end, George? Because they created something here, right? So this isn't Iraq. Afghanistan is very different. So we had ISIS after the withdrawal of Iraq, whether you argue that was done correctly or not. I don't think is particularly relevant. We got Peter back, great. But does this end, George, at least anytime soon? Like Peter was saying, this is who they are. This is what they do. They've created this situation now. What's next? What is coming down the pike?
Well, that's a very good question, because he with this debacle on his hands, is likely to want to rectify the situation with some kind of a foreign policy success. And so therefore, you get a feeling that he will be tempted to engage in something. Now, maybe into some kind of a confrontation with China, or maybe with some kind of humanitarian intervention. There's talk about Ethiopia, which seems to be a particular interest of Samantha Power. Talk about Myanmar. There's a lot of genocide going on in Myanmar. So it's likely that he will want to change the subject, because he's got this humiliation on his hands, and I think that's why things may be quite dangerous,
George.
and particularly with some of the people around.
Yeah, God help
Yep.
us.
Such
Yeah.
as Susan Rice. Susan Rice was a key person who pushed Obama into Libya and into Syria. So that's why I think that that whole kind of America would just be withdraw from the world. I don't think that's necessarily on the cards.
There's also let's not forget Ukraine.
Ukraine,
Okay,
exactly.
I'm worrying about that very much. Okay, because you have the RussiaGate phobia out there, and it could be it'd be really easy to cause a lot of trouble in Ukraine. It'd be very hard to get it resolved. And I will tell you, mark my words, you saw it here, the U.S. will be humiliated if they try to do it.
And there is that phobia is still out there. Politico put out that article yesterday about how the Biden administration seems disconnected from reality. They just can't tell the truth. That everybody knew of that State Department cable that was leaked. So when he came out and made those assessments, and really it's not just him, it's the entire White House. Any bit of information you get about the evacuations, which they're all focusing on now, like you said, that's their narrative right now. That's their talking point. It's much bigger than just the evacuations. That's a temporary issue at this point. But Politico, of course, knew of that cable. So they put out those numbers with a caveat that is what the White House says. That is not confirmed. And everybody on Twitter, blue check liberals, journalists, your regular old RussiaGate truthers, started making accusations, which I thought were hilarious. That what is Vladimir Putin now directing what's coming on Politico? I mean, this is mad. This is a bit of madness, gentlemen. I mean, it's when you have this straw man that you constantly go back because you can't face the reality that your worldview is wrong. So they can't face that reality. So somebody has to be a boogeyman. So you bring up Ukraine, Peter, and especially with Biden's history there. I think that's a likely target of attention,
Right.
and I pray it's not, because the Team Biden is just my man. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, no, and I think it'd be interesting because if the Democrats suffer a major defeat in next year's midterms, you can be absolutely certain that they're going to blame it on Putin. Putin's interfered in the election, and if they lose control of the House, lose control of the Senate, there's really nothing else for Biden to do other than foreign policy, because when you do foreign policy, you don't need congressional approval. And so therefore, I think there is a great danger that they're going to embark on once again the anti-Putin crusade of 2017 and 2018. So I think that's always on the back burner with the Democrats.
And just on that note, before Peter, on that note, we start our generic ballot in the very next poll we're going to do. Because now it's time. We're past the summer. People will start to pay attention with everything that's going on. So now is the time. And also, yesterday, Herschel Walker filed to run for Senate in Georgia. Raphael Warnock's seat was a special election seat. He had to defend that in a midterm that, history tells us is not going to be a good one for Democrats. So that puts now the upper chamber back on the table. And, if they lose the last couple in the House and Herschel takes a seat, from them in Georgia, because I don't think Georgia's a blue state. I really don't. It's going to be ad nauseum, Vladimir Putin. It's just going to be ad nauseum. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead. I'll throw it to you.
I think another potential troubling spot is Taiwan. Because I'm agreeing with George here, is that Biden and his foolish B-teamers are going to desperately try to look for some kind of foreign policy success. And we've already, the Chinese have come out very aggressive in taunting the United States. I want to point this out to everyone. 5 years ago, you didn't get that kind of rhetoric out of Beijing. They're getting very boisterous right now. And Biden might take the bait. All right. And of course, there are plenty of people around him that want to do that. So he's put himself into a real quandary. George is absolutely right. I mean, if he had handled COVID, which in my opinion, I think it was a walk in the park for him. Okay. I think he let people use this Delta variant to scramble everything up. So he's definitely underwater, and there's going to be people that want to make up for this humiliation, like the Millies and people like I look at Tony Blinken. He's already been humiliated in this administration. So I mean, I'm on eggshells here because I'm very worried that the U.S. is going to thrash out to try to compensate for this because it is a humiliation. It didn't have to look this way at all.
Well, what about, I mean, if we're talking about China, this is the problem. This is what I worry about. So just emboldening people. Beijing backs the North Koreans. Trump is out of the door now. There is no hope for any kind of real, not even normalization of relations. But, Trump's basic plan with North Korea was, give him an incentive, give him a carrot, wouldn't he be the hero of his people if he brought prosperity to the North Korean people? That's out the window now. So now I'm worried about somebody like, Kim Jong-un lashing out because he can. He'll have the okay and the blessing of Beijing to do it. Biden, so I mean, that's one of those where maybe he would, hold his trigger finger a little bit because there's not many options. But yeah, and at the end of the day, on COVID, I think what happened there, Peter, is that they had nothing else. From a pollster's point of view, he was on top on the economy one time, and that was when the vaccine was out. I'm not even sure it had to do with the economy. I think people just told us that because the vaccine was rolling out and they were happy. But generally, now he's upside down on that. He's badly upside down on immigration. Foreign policy is 36%, I think, in our latest poll. I mean, he had nowhere else to go. And COVID is now basically 50-50 split. And there was almost no undecideds on COVID, which means people changed their mind. They went from approving to saying they disapprove instead of going from maybe I somewhat approve to undecided, because the undecided is still only 3%, Peter. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, this is your expertise here. And some of the polls that I've been looking at is that he's definitely deeply underwater with independence. Is that really the key here?
Yeah, it really is. And I would say, I think we just caught the tip of that. And we split those independents in our polling. That's truly NPAs, no party affiliation, or nones, because we take third parties out. And when we report it, that's where we say something else. So those are Green Party, Libertarians. Those were key to his victory, according to the media. And they are even worse than independents. And that happened within a couple of months. That just completely slid. When we combine them together, it's low 40s. But I think that was part of the trend. If we would have kept polling, it would have fell more. And in the USA Today poll, that's what you see. You see is in the 30s now with them. So very possible we capped it. And when we did, it was 41%. But if you would have kept going, it's 36, 38, So I think that's, and I know we'll get Peter back. He's having some connective issues. I know we'll get him back. But yeah, your thoughts on that, George, because those are the voters that were key.
Those are very true because he has problems clearly on the economy. There's the inflationary issues, clear fears of inflation.
Yeah.
And then you have the issue on the border. And of course, then, the Afghan situation, and the aspect of it, I think, that does cause great anxiety on the public is how many Afghans are you actually going to bring into the country? I mean, you're talking about, even a couple of 100,000, maybe that, maybe less, I don't know. But I think that's causing an anxiety. So, and then he really, done this, his domestic agenda, this $3.5 trillion bill with all of this nonsense, none of that is popular. I mean, like the idea that somehow, if you just spend a lot of money, people are going to vote for you. He should have seen what happened in the 1960s. It didn't work for Lyndon Johnson. Johnson also thought, oh, well, I'll do what FDR did, spend a lot of money, and then people just keep voting for me. It didn't work for him. Debacle
That's
in
right.
the six midterms, devastating defeat for the Democrats in '68, and they were pretty much out until the Bill Clinton in 1992. So you had a whole generation of Republicans controlling the Oval Office. So for Biden to think that, oh, well, I'll just spend 3.5 trillion, that's on top of all the other trillions that have been spent, I think it's just politically nuts.
And Peter, you were going to say something before you left, just to top off. Yeah, I think we just caught that slide to answer what you were saying. I think we just caught that slide with those people, and it's trepidation at this point because we have the registered voter economic confidence index. It tanked 11 points this month. We don't see movements like that in this poll. It inches a little bit here and there. It does not go 11, 10, 11 points.
But you people are not blind to the fact that, they claim that they're vetting people from Afghanistan while not vetting anyone from the southern border. I mean, you don't have to be a news junkie to say, yeah, this doesn't make any sense here. And the thing that I stress, George and I stress so much on the Gaggle, is that the abject incompetence of all of these people. That you have a dysfunctional, dystopian ideology run by incompetent people. Yeah. And this is what you get.
The Democrat, Bruce Russert, and for those, who don't know, I spoke with you guys about this a little bit. I just bored did a lot of school, especially after I got out of the Army. I just wanted, and international relations was a real passion of mine. I love. Bruce Russert couldn't even defend the democratic peace theory for his advanced degree. It was a failed thesis, and everyone in Washington D.C. believes this nonsense. Bill Clinton started it. I would argue. The democratization. If we just make everybody a democracy, the world will be safe. Charles Krauthammer later coined it democratic realism. There's no such thing, gentlemen. I mean, can we just tell the audience to dispel with this right now? There is no such thing. It does not exist.
No.
There's no such thing as right to protect. It's all nonsense. Right. It's a PR job.
No, I think that's a very good point. I mean, that's Bill Clinton, who all of these disastrous policies were all launched by Bill Clinton, such as the expansion of NATO. There was no need for that. There was absolutely no reason. He pushed forward for that. And then he kind of decided, oh, we need some kind of easy U.S. military intervention. And then he launched the Bosnian bombing. And then, having got a taste of that, he then did the Kosovo bombing, and then continued with the expansion of NATO and antagonizing Russia. I mean, you think of how good relations were between the United States and Russia in the early 90s. I mean. But by the time Clinton was gone, that was it. Yeltsin, the consequence of Bill Clinton's bombing of Yugoslavia was the ouster of Yeltsin, because the Russian military just suddenly realized just how weak and pathetic they had become, and the installation of Vladimir Putin, who was going to pursue a very different policy for Russia. That was a direct consequence of what Bill Clinton did, and there was no reason for it to do so. And and then what Clinton did, then of course all the rest of them, Bush, Obama, just multiplied.
Yeah, and completely antithetical to what the strongest, most sound policies are. So you think about, I just mentioned it before, balancing. Who, if we piss off Russia, who is left to balance against China? And I get a lot of heat for this, so I'm curious your thoughts, guys. Honestly, I say we're in this post World War II.
I mean,
we're just in this post World War II era where it's totally outdated. Let Japan go. That's the way I see it. I mean, this is a warrior island who kept this massive continent in check for years. They're now our enemy. They're not a friend. They're an enemy. Let them go. I don't understand why we're babysitting people like Japan. I don't know who else will be left. Germany doesn't have a significant fighting force. They're not even allowed, for most people who don't understand that. And the United Kingdom, like you guys brought up before, the United Kingdom and France are neutered their jokes. I don't know who would we call on. What would this coalition look like, guys? In this, I mean, I
Well,
don't get it.
you know, George and I guess, George, we've shown our cards so many times, but we've never addressed it directly. Is that our hero is Charles de Gaulle because
Yeah,
he cared about France, okay? And when the
yeah,
Americans said, we need you to do this on NATO,
yeah.
no, we're not interested, and that's your problem, okay? And we're going to have good relations with the Soviet Union, by the way, okay? That's what we need to have. What so many people don't understand is that the Cold War era was so anomalous to great power politics. We're back to great power politics. So
Yeah.
China's going to pursue its agenda, okay? It doesn't care if it offends you. It doesn't care rules-based order, whatever that means, okay? And the United States needs to do the same thing. Trump was right. He knew it in his DNA. He just didn't do it very well, and he had the worst possible people around him. But we're back to great power politics, folks. That's how geopolitics has worked since the ancient Greeks, okay, for goodness sake. But why people get all wound up and tied into a pretzel? This is the way it is, okay?
Well, you
And
nailed it.
every,
A bilateral system is the exception to the historical rule. All right, multilateral great power politics is the vast all of the history we have. That's the norm. And you know what? I'm not sure there's anything wrong
you
with
don't
it.
you don't have friends. You have interests.
Right, right.
Who cares? I don't care about the EU. I don't care about Britain. I don't care about Germany. Let them take care of themselves. They're rich. Okay? Take care of your problems. We'll take care of ours.
Right. No,
We need to break this mindset. It needs to
Yep.
be deconstructed.
No, I think that's right, and I think that was the problem. That again, it goes back to the Bill Clinton. Is that there was an opportunity at that moment to let go of all of that Cold War alliance system and the whole idea that then need NATO and the transatlantic alliance and directed against somebody or other. That was a moment you could could have let it go. Instead, he embarked on this NATO expansion, and so now you actually have this artificial entity. I mean, this whole NATO bloc, the transatlantic bloc, it's harming the world. It's actually a danger to world peace because it is continually having to justify its existence. And the only way it can continue to justify its existence is by inventing enemies. So one day we're onto humanitarian intervention. Next day it's the global war on terror. Then the day after that, Russia's back. We got to take on Russia. Now it's China's back, so we got to take care of China and Russia together. So we need to expand into Central Asia. So thereby antagonize both Russia and China at the same time, and then thereby continue to justify NATO's existence. It is actually very, very dangerous. And we talked many times on the Gaggle. Some of the number of crises have come about directly as a result of NATO. The crisis in Georgia in 2008 was directly a result of NATO offering a membership to Georgia.
Yeah.
2014 crisis in Ukraine came about again because NATO, in this case the European Union, was offering de facto membership of NATO to Ukraine, and this obviously was going to antagonize a very large chunk of the Ukraine's population and provoke the conflict in Ukraine. So NATO is a real public menace.
And it almost destabilized Turkey, George, for that matter. I mean, so it does. It's not even it's not only centered around Europe, and people have to understand that. What does, and that's a loaded question, but I just can't ignore it. What does this? If we just had Syrian, we know what happens with mass, I wouldn't even call it immigration, refugee resettlement programs. We've seen it with Syrians. We have seen it with Afghanistan. I saw a segment yesterday, and I went to check on it because I really didn't know whether I could trust it or believe it. about sexual crimes in Austria and Germany. What does this mean for Eastern and Central Europe and for the West if we do this? I mean, it's a virtue signal that puts a population at risk. This is the dominant conversation now. How many refugees can you get out? How many are, but where are they going and what happens when they get there is not part of this conversation. This is crazy to me. If we're going to avoid everything else that's important, George, we should at least talk about all elements of this conversation, right?
And what is so shocking about this is that we've already learned a great deal about the Afghan refugees, that they have caused an enormous spike in crime throughout Europe, particularly.
Get in and close that door.
And Germany. And that was,
You got to lower your voice.
Yeah. I have to lower my voice. Or...
Oh, you could hear that? No, I'm sorry. I was telling them. I thought I killed the mic. Whoops! I was like, don't interrupt.
So we know about Austria and Germany. So a particular propensity on the part of the Afghan men to commit violent crimes against.
George, who wrote that report?
Yeah,
who wrote that?
The woman who wrote that report, which I only found out a few days ago, is the wife of Szamuely Khalilzad, who is the former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan and the man who negotiated the Doha Agreement. So she wasn't just a kind of a human rights worker. She knows whereof she speaks. She's married to Szamuely Khalilzad, who knows Afghanistan. He said these people are a real menace to European civilian life. You're not going to be able to just fit them in. And trying to fit them in is about as dumb as trying to essentially impose kind of democracy on Afghanistan.
Yet you have Joni Ernst, who represents the state of Iowa, parading out there and saying, we want 40,000 in Iowa. Really? Donald Trump won the state of Iowa by 10 points because the state of Iowa wants 40,000 Afghan refugees? This is just so tone deaf. It's unbelievable. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
Well, look, so we went into Afghanistan on the back of the events of 9/11. NATO invoked Article 5. So we go into Afghanistan to destroy Al-Qaeda and its allies. The Taliban are basically run to Pakistan, where they're given safe haven. And then for the next 20 years, they work their way back. And so we went there to secure security. And now we're going to import insecurity with these refugees, or whatever you want to call migrants. It's pure insanity. It's pure. But for George and I, it's our mantra. These people are going to find another way to go back in. Joe failed this, but we're going to find another way. I'm absolutely convinced of it. You look at Fox; they're gone complete mad. Okay. ISIS-K. I bet Joe Biden just heard someone say ISIS-K, okay? They're kind of fantasy stuff all over again.
It's like a COVID variant.
Look at all, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC. Who do they have on their guests? All of the architects of this disaster.
Yeah, Peter did. I don't know if everybody got a chance to read George W. Bush's letter or his press release. It was basically a letter, and everybody ran to cover it. And amazingly, he covered for Joe Biden on how bad, or he was at least trying to. I don't think there was a way to cover it, but he at least tried to. And then goes into this rant about all of the wonderful work that had been done over 20 years. This is just a complete, disconnection's not even the word. These people live in an alternate reality, and they will try to go back in. They will. And I read that, and I'm looking at the reaction from everybody, the usual suspects, and I'm thinking back to this April 2018 meeting that Donald Trump had with all of his national security people in the Situation Room. And this is when Mattis and the rest of them just were like, this guy's got to go. They ran to CNN. They leaked because he went in there and he said, I know what you're doing in Syria. It's going to end. So, knock it off. They were telling the public this was a humanitarian issue. Of course, it really was regime change. You guys know that. It's a covert CIA op. And he tells them, get rid of that. And by the way, Afghanistan is next. And they blew their lids. So they wanted Joe Biden to avoid this. They really did. And now here we are later as a country with this new leader, and they didn't even get what they wanted, is my point. They didn't even get, they did all of this disruption, no improvement on COVID to speak of, nothing that's original from the Biden administration. That was not that was all inherited. And then the economy is not where it was expected to have been had the former president remained in office, been reelected. So these people engineered, for years and years, telling us a horrible man. They engineered this, and this is the result anyway. You understand? Like, so it just all dawned on me at once. They'll of course they're going to try to go back, because it's really all they have. They can't give up on the dream, right?
No.
Well,
never
think
give
of
up
all
on
the
it.
money.
The
The
money.
money.
The United States
money.
can never depart. I mean, you were talking about Syria. They immediately came down on Trump's plan to withdraw from Syria. Oh, the Kurds, we're abandoning the Kurds.
Right.
Look, Trump proposed, pulling some troops out of Germany. 75 years later, we still can't move troops out of Germany. You have to stay in Germany. Why? Oh, Hitler might come back.
Ramstein will fall.
So if you can't even withdraw from Germany, where can you withdraw from? So, but this is something I'd like to ask Rich. What do you think? Is that now that they brought Biden in, the whole, the deep state, military, intelligence, the media, they delivered, they gave the presidency to Biden thinking that he was going to go back on Trump's policy. This has come back to shock them.
Yeah.
Actually continued Trump's policy on Afghanistan. Are they going to now try to get him out? Because they find a replacement, just like they tried to get Trump out. They're going to make a move to kick him out.
But George,
later.
But George, there's one problem with that.
I know, and that's what I was going to want.
This is
one problem.
Everybody in D.C., the political class, the foreign policy wing, the media, they really did, in the very beginning of the Democratic primary, want Kamala Harris. But she couldn't even earn a vote. And now they thought, well, let's put her on the ticket with Joe. Maybe she'll be popular, right? Her approval rating is lower than his in our polling now. And the truth is, she was never really liked by anybody but them. Americans have a very negative and visceral reaction to her. She's just not a likable person. She inherently looks mean. She's just not. So they really put themselves, George, in a position here, because I do think they want him gone. And Kamala would play ball a lot more than Joe Biden would. We all know how she plays ball. And she's willing to do just about anything to get in bed with people of power, quite literally. And so basically,
right.
I think at this point it's so bad that soon they are going to be willing to trade her on popularity for what he is and how bad he's making them look. Because, in the end, we got now 2 Democratic senators who chair these committees in the Senate, and they are going to open this investigation against, how this happened. And if there's any way to get a bipartisan agreement on a throw a president out, it's a foreign policy blunder, folks. This would have taken, I do believe, and good, we got Peter. I do believe this would have downed Trump. So there are about almost 20 Republican senators who are, I call them the Fox News senators. They're two-faced backstabbers. One day they're on Fox News. They love Donald Trump. Then the next day I get a call from a friend who's a donor who's like, listen now, Lindsey Graham was talking about Donald Trump at my house yesterday. Same thing with his fellow senator, Tim Scott, and down the line, John Thune. They hate this guy. They have always hated him. And that would have, I believe if Donald Trump did this, that would have been it for them guys. This would have been the excuse they needed to say, all right, fine, let's remove him. Not just impeach him. He was impeached twice, but removed, convicted. And especially when we start to see some of the fruits of what is happening here. I heard Eric Prince on War Room before
Well, I mean,
the show this morning, and it don't sound good over there. It just doesn't.
Okay. Don't even mention Eric Prince in my presence, okay? I mean, he's going to be on Tucker tonight.
Yeah, go. You know what? No, go ahead, because I
what's
was
really
stuck in the queue, not able to say anything. So I'm always open to more points of view. Always. Oh, I lost Peter.
Well, we can talk about
good.
Eric.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. No, but the interesting thing is that one of the reasons why Joe decided to go through with it, because they have polling numbers that people want to get out of Afghanistan.
That's right.
And he thought this would be a foreign policy win for me, because he needs one, just one, that would be verifiably popular. Okay. And what happened was is that Trump pulled the pin and gave it to Joe. Okay. Because it was going to be a fiasco anyway. I mean, Trump's got to be in Mar-a-Lago just having a really good laugh. Okay. Because now he can come back and say he's incompetent.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that goes back to the question. If you get rid of Biden, you got Kamala Harris.
Yep.
So the sensible thing to do, and Peter and I have discussed this, the sensible thing is to do what they did to Spiro Agnew, because they couldn't get rid of Nixon if Spiro Agnew took over. Yep. So you go into the drawer, take out these criminal charges against Spiro Agnew, dust them off, and say, oh, by the way, we've got this on you. And then goodbye to Spiro Agnew. So the question is now they've got to go into the drawer and find something on Kamala Harris, get rid of her, get Biden to appoint someone like John Kerry as his VP, and then you can shove Biden out of the door and Kerry would be president. I mean, I would think that that's the kind of scenario that would work.
And I think that's why, too, we saw some moves against Andrew Cuomo. Everybody knew Andrew Cuomo was a sexual, I don't want to say predator. Look, I'm from New York City. I get him and his brother's behavior. I get Donald Trump's behavior. They pretend like they're like virtuous and they care about it. It's very common, right? It is not something everyone, this was revealed to everybody. Everybody knew how the Cuomo brothers operated and how, that this was an excuse used to get rid of him at a certain time. He became both a liability and a threat. A liability to Democrats with the nursing home debacle specifically, and a threat to
you could say Gavin
Harris.
Newsom as well.
And Gavin Newsom,
Gavin
absolutely.
Newsom.
That's what I wonder. I'll tell you, I wonder what's going on at Team Gavin right now, because he's got to be thinking that he's the next Cuomo on the chopping block, and that he's got to pull out. He's picking up the phone and calling Willie as frantically as he can, probably on the daily. What do you got for me, buddy? What do you got for me? Because he's another one, that really falls into that same category. And if you're Kamala, you got to be watching your back right now. You have to be, so you don't get Spiro'd. We could just call it Spiro'd, so you don't get Agnewed. All right, whatever it is. But if you're her, you have to be watching your back. You're this close from the presidency, but there are people who really, really do not want to hand the reins to you because your numbers did not turn out. And she can't help it. Did you see her on the tarmac yesterday? She just can't help herself. It's not going to get any better. She's a horrible leader optically and every other sense of the word.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think it's right. I mean, and the Democrats know that if she leads them into the 2024 election, they're facing a complete debacle. So that's why, they have to figure out what are we going to do. We have to get rid of Biden, but we can't have her. So you kind of like, what do they have on her? It's again, we talked about this before on the Gaggle, which is it's very easy to get rid of the VP. I mean, it's hard to get rid of a president because impeachment is a very complicated process. But a VP is quite easy to get rid of. I mean, Agnew was gone within 48 hours. I mean, they just brought up this case and he was out. I mean, so the question is there something on Harris that they can just bring out, get her out, put in I think John Kerry. I have to think Kerry is the one who's being groomed to take over.
Yeah, I will say this, guys. Sadly, the person pulled out before. Oh no, this time we lost George. That's funny. He'll be back. Basically, the heart of the story pulled out before it went to print. But there definitely is a long history on Kamala Harris, specifically something that could literally take her out overnight, which is how she chose to prosecute sex crimes in the Catholic Church when she was the top cop over there. And I am sure that if I can find it, if People's Pundit Daily can find that story, then the New York Times can if they're given their marching orders to do so. The Washington Post can if they're giving their marching orders to do so. Or it could be a local paper because I'm sure they know all about it over in the Bay Area. It's just it would have to be that too, guys, because who's number three? Somebody more unpopular than them, both of them, and she cannot be seen as the face of the Democratic Party. Our negatives for Nancy Pelosi this month almost hit Mitch McConnell's, and he's the most unpopular guy in Congress. He always has the highest combined unfavorables, but Nancy Pelosi always has the highest very unfavorables. That went to 45%, went to 45% this month, and she was about 1.5 points away from Mitch McConnell in combined unfavorables. So she's not even an option, because Rick Scott, the senator from Florida, he brought up the 25th Amendment. During this hearing, because they are opening that investigation, during this hearing, I am going to discuss the 25th Amendment. And privately, you have to say, well, where does that leave you? What are you prepared to do with Kamala Harris? Because next on the chopping block, if she's on the chopping block next in line is Nancy Pelosi. So you would be no more happy with her, would you? So, it would have to be something like a Spiro Agnew situation. It really would. I mean,
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
go ahead.
No, I think that's right. And that was it. Agnew was gone within 48 hours. And then Nixon then went for Gerald Ford, and he pretty much sealed his fate with Gerald Ford, because Gerald Ford was the kind of Republicans the Democrats loved. They can always roll him over. I mean, he didn't really stand for anything very much. The usual kind of business roundtable kind of Republican. And they were absolutely delighted with Ford was there. They could safely impeach Nixon and remove him. They thought. I'm still not sure exactly why Nixon did pick Ford. I mean, why he could have picked someone that the Democrats would have really hated. I mean, like John Connolly or somebody like that. He didn't. He went for Ford, but he sealed his fate. So I think that something of the sort would. I mean, do you agree with my assessment that John Kerry would be somebody that they would want to put into that position if they can push Harris out? That Kerry would be the VP.
And it would fit the pattern too, because look at what the recent pattern. Look at what they did with Joe Biden. I mean, just a generation ago, Joe Biden was deemed by the American electorate to not only not be the right guy, but he was disqualified from being president. So they literally needed a generation of Americans to die and have another one become of voting age to be able to get Joe Biden in office. But he was kind of like the next in line in the old guard, not the Ocasio-Cortez wing of the party, but still somebody that they generally viewed to be favorable to the administrative state, the deep state, whatever you want to call it. Remember, Joe Biden, folks, has been around for 4 decades, and for 4 decades he was on the wrong end of every one of their bad decisions. So if you just looked at Joe Biden, before this Afghanistan situation and withdrawal, you would think that he basically would do whatever they said to do, right? But I think that we really nailed it, which is simply, George, he had nothing else. He had no other card to play. Period. Trump already announced we're going. It was very popular. He really just could not have anything else, put on him. So that was the reason why he bucked that trend. John Kerry has been their undercover conspirator for 4 years now under Donald Trump. And for people who may not know this, it was John Kerry who went all over the world to tell a boss, don't deal with Donald Trump. It was John Kerry who went back back channels to talk to the Iranians. Don't worry about the Iran deal with Donald Trump. He'll be gone soon. John Kerry is the man with the shoe leather worn to prove how much he's been around the world 4 years, basically subverting the U.S. government, the head of the U.S. government. So he would be a very logical choice,
Right,
although, and that he was a nominee. Democrats are becoming what Republicans used to be, which is this hierarchical, right?
Yeah.
And Democrats were
Yeah.
always the ones that were more about,
A
democracy.
really
We
good
pick our
point.
own. Yeah, and now
Yeah,
they
like
are
when
the ones. Go ahead, Peter.
when Newt Gingrich went into Congress, he got rid of the seniority, and he said, no, I'm gonna play hardball here. And and now the Democrats are doing it. It's very Politburo like. It's very Politburo. Okay.
Wow, that's a great point. Yeah.
It's we should do a separate podcast just on the similarities of the authoritarian reach of these people. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, Oh, go ahead, George. You go first. Go ahead.
Within the Republican Party, you had essentially a democratic resurgence with the rise of Donald Trump. I mean, basically you had the Republican Party establishment that said, well, this is our man, Jeb Bush. The Bush dynasty is in place. They've got the money. They've got the connections. This guy will be our nominee. And Trump just swept away all of the senators and governors, and I don't know, 17 people ran in 2016. Yep. It was a real grassroots initiative. People just wanted somebody who spoke for them, which was Trump. You had the opposite within the Democrats. Hillary Clinton was the anointed one. She was thrust in, and forget Bernie Sanders. It will be her. And then they did that in 2020. I mean, nobody wanted Biden. I mean, those embarrassing primaries. I mean, he was coming in 4th and 5th. Nobody wanted him until Barack Obama stepped in and said, right, everybody vote for Biden, and then that's it. Within days, Biden was a nominee. So yeah, it's quite an amazing phenomenon of the Democrats. It really is. You appoint the nominee. You don't actually vote for it.
And they hitched their wagon, to the, I guess they always had more in common than true traditional conservatives and, leaning to the right populists. They always had more in common, but it was definitely a coalition shit. They hitched their wagon to the Bill Kristols, to the other neoconservatives, who really always did have more in common. And the Washington Post fact checker yesterday, Glenn Kessler, weighs in on the Virginia race, tweets about the Washington Post, and has the nerve to call Bill Kristol a conservative. You guys are foreign policy guys, all right? You damn well know. I mean, explain to the audience that there is nothing in common between conservatism and neoconservative. Go ahead, Peter. I mean, this is crazy.
No, this is really crazy because these neoconservatives, these neocons, they have no moral foundation. I mean, they would go into the Democratic Party with ease, and they did. I mean, and that's one of the outcomes of Trump's election is that the neocons have found their way into liberal media, into the Democratic Party. It's really extraordinary. I mean, it is a single easily defined victory of any other group in politics since 2016. I mean, and then you have this really odious Lincoln Project trying to do exactly the same thing. They're just more grubby, okay? But I mean, Bill Kristol, you take your hat off to him. I mean, he's been able to capture the Republican Party and the Democratic Party simultaneously.
Did worm their way into the Republican Party, because if you think of traditional Republican Party foreign policy, it's Eisenhower, Nixon, very prudential use of American power. It was the neocons who had been within the Democratic Party, the ones who had worked for Scoop Jackson, who was a demented, cold warrior. They worked and then they moved in, and they look. If you remember what they did, they almost brought down Ronald Reagan. I mean, Iran-Contra almost brought him down, but they somehow they just stayed on. And now the older Bush had, was at least sort of, kept them at more of a distance. But with the younger Bush, they completely took this over. So it's very strange to call him a conservative. When in fact, the conservative has always been exactly opposed to everything that the Bill Kristol and Elliot Abrams and all of the Paul Wolfowitz and all of the rest of them who had been part of the Democratic, but they always thought that was alien. And then they kind of, and they dominated the Republicans really until Donald Trump came along, and Trump, kind of went back, basically instinctively to the sort of Eisenhower Nixon way of thinking.
Yeah, and the reaction from some of them to the phrase itself, America First, that was, you just really said it. The 20th century, first half, 20th century Republican Party especially, they actually used that phrase before, and it was American businesses, American interests. They weren't, I wouldn't say they were not isolationists, but they were non-interventionists, and it was the Democratic administrations that got us into major conflicts. World War I, World War II, the Korean War, Vietnam. These were Democrat wars that Republicans in the last half of the century closed the book on, George. And, it's funny, just so brief history here, because I try on Twitter is like not a place to tell a story, but I try. Irving Kristol, Bill Kristol's father, was basically a commie, a left-wing statist, and these people, the neocons, for those who don't know the history, they were Democrats and in the Democratic Party until the Vietnam counterculture and anti-war counterculture basically forced them out of the Democrat. They had no home. They had no political home. And Reagan was no neocon.
They were Trotskyites.
They were Trotskyites. Thank you, Peter, for crying out loud. This is nuts. And by the way, who is most to blame for this grift of the neocons? Fox News. Yep. With their Charles Krauthammer special report panels, you remember all of that? Bill Kristol, Charles Krauthammer, and Jonah Goldberg. These were supposed to be Brett Baer's, expert conservative foreign policy minds. They represented none of that. Never did. And they only hitched their wagon to Ronald Reagan because Carter was so weak and he really had no chops. The party itself was still anti-anything, even anti-defend yourself at that point. And to people who said, well, Reagan let him in. Reagan let in a lot of people. He won 48 states in Israel. Are you kidding me? It was a pretty big coalition. They didn't have a huge voice in and the things they did do behind his back, like you said. He knew a little bit more than he should. But I don't want to pretend. I'm not, giving Reagan a pass here. But basically, Pat Buchanan's right. He was no neocon. It's just, the Kirkpatricks, he let them in because he was so anti-communism. But what nobody seemed to acknowledge, they came from a long line of Trotskys and commies. This is who they were. They were domestic statists who believed in the primacy of U.S. power to shape their world in their image, what they believed. So impose your values, use military might to do it. It's that simple.
You're exactly right. And if you remember, they turned on Ronald Reagan with a fury once Reagan changed his policy after the rise of Gorbachev, and then he signed all these arms control agreements. They basically were calling him, effectively a traitor. He was betraying his country by signing these things with the horrible Soviets. And you're absolutely right. Reagan wasn't interested in global democratic revolution and basically turning the rest of the world into mini Americas. That was their ideology. Then subsequently, once Reagan disappeared from the scene, they took over the mantle of Ronald Reagan. Well, we believe in Ronald Reagan. We're pursuing a Reaganite policy. Never did it was Ronald Reagan embraced any of this. So and they were a disaster. As I say, you have Iran-Contra, which was a calamity for Reagan. But then you have, George W. Bush. Really the worst president ever, and highly a creature of the neocons.
Yeah, and I just say even his father, before the invasion in Iraq, even his father's former Secretary of State penned an op-ed in the New York Times as a last-minute ditch to try to get control of the insanity that he led into his administration, because he knew all of these people, guys. He knew this crowd. And he said, this is going to bring it all down. You just started your presidency, and he didn't heed that warning. And he ran as an America First kind of candidate in 2000, which is how he changed the electoral maps and brought the Perot coalition. And in New Hampshire, he won re-election barely because of a sliver in Iowa, but New Hampshire told the tale. Very non-interventionalist state. He carried it in 2000. He lost it against Kerry in 2004. Kerry was the anti-Iraq candidate. He was the pro-Iraq candidate, and that should have told them everything they needed to know. But they went on this delusion. I should have that clip because George, man, that was a good point. I should have that clip of Bill O'Reilly when he was on. He still had the O'Reilly factor, and he had George Will on, and he just eviscerated George Will for being a fraud, and about how he hitched his wagon to Ronald Reagan, and he had just, I think, written Killing Reagan, so that's what he was promoting, and really got into how these guys they were not on Fox. What they were on Fox News was not their history. George Will called it kamikaze conservative. Ronald Reagan was a kamikaze conservative. He was going to tank it all. He was going to destroy the party, right? And I mean, this is what George Will said about this man first. And by the way, Trump came in and wiped out all 17 of those guys, deep bench in 16. One of the most promising ones was Scott Walker. And who ran his campaign? George Will's wife. George Will's wife.
Well, another thing
Enough said.
Another thing we have to keep in mind here is that the ascendancy of these neocons. They should be called radicals, because that's would be a better name for them. Is that what we saw again because of Trump derangement syndrome? We saw these neocons, very small group of people, infiltrate all of media. Okay, so and we see it to this day. And so when John Brennan, I mean. George and I, you never would have a former, CIA director as a pundit on television. I mean, it was just unheard of. And now all of the cable is infiltrated by these people, and what they do is you have this closed circle of narrative. Okay, I've heard from intelligence. And then you tell, on your show, well, I heard from my colleagues, and then they repeat it, and then they say, oh, yeah, that's true. It's a circular thing, okay? And it's completely devoid from reality. It is imposing their narrative. And what they do is always confirmation. We hear from the like I've always said, when you meet Mr. Anonymous, let me know who it is, because, Anonymous seems to know a lot of stuff.
Oh, I'll tell you, and that used to be in the media world. That was called, and you just said it, circular reporting. It was a big, big no-no. You never were able to do that before, guys. It was like the Trump era changed all of the rules, and it was, this man, they're all using the Steele dossier, but then Brennan's confirming some elements of the Steele dossier. He goes on MSNBC and says it, then tells somebody else who's a reporter who comes on right after and says, I can confirm that because she just heard it from John Brennan, who is repeating the dossier. I mean, it was crazy. And that is supposed to be, unethical, but now it's the norm. And, I got a hat tip to Glenn Greenwald over that, because he was one of the lone really, voices in saying this is not okay. To have these people hired as pundits now to come on and this is not all right. We're already basically copy and pasting press releases from intelligence agencies.
That's right.
and putting them up as, confirmed news reporting. The last thing we need are their pundits, who led those agencies or worked for those agencies, coming on and pretending as if they're adding additional credibility to the story, because it's not. It's just circular garbage. And, led a lot of people astray, guys. There's still people on my Twitter feed to this day who think Donald Trump colluded with Vladimir Putin to steal the election in 2016. They're still out there.
And there's been no accounting for that. That's the amazing thing.
That's right.
People, they still have their prestigious jobs on cable TV, and they're still pontificating away. And so all of that, you should have thought, giving credence to that nonsense of the Steele dossier, the claiming that the Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation, that the Russians put a bounty on the heads of American soldiers, all of this nonsense that they're happily peddling and repeating, and saying, well, we have it, on good authority, and the walls are closing in. No one's paid any price. No, it's as if it didn't happen. And they continue to talk about Trump's conspiracy theories and the conspiracy theory. What about the worst conspiracy theory of all time, which is the Vladimir Putin swooped in and stole the 2016 election? I mean, and that's something that the mainstream media were happy to repeat ad nauseum for 4 years.
And I'm not going to say his name, but the shooter who shot Steve Scalise and 4 other people at the baseball game, we captured his screenshots before Facebook took down his account. He firmly believed that was true. Trump was a traitor, that we were in grave danger as a country, and he believed that Republicans were his, and I'll use his words, enablers, and they had to be dealt with too, because they were letting this traitor live in the White House.
Yeah.
Ahead,
well, I
Peter.
mean, why don't we just go full blown here, gentlemen? If Vladimir Putin put Donald Trump in the White House, maybe he put Barack Obama in the White House too.
Well, we lost him after that. I got to bring him back. But yeah, remember if the transmit to Vladimir comment with Medvedev, if that had been Donald Trump caught on a hot mic saying that, forget it. I mean, talk about the walls closing, and the walls would collapse and the sky would fall. I mean, this is, beyond what we, even say is a double standard. Peter, I want to let you finish your thought there, because it would be, if Trump was caught in the hot mic with Medvedev the way that Barack Obama was, oh my God, it would be the end of creation as we know it.
Well, I mean, during the presidential debate, remember, Biden could claim, well, 50 foreign policy experts and in and out of government can claim that Hunter Biden's laptop is Russian disinformation. There's no way that is possible. Okay, I mean, what they did was they made phone calls and said, "We're going to put your name on the list." Yeah, go ahead. Okay, I mean, the absolute bald-faced lying. Okay, that's what we're getting. And that's why we have the foreign policy that we do. It's all based on lies.
Peter, really, I mean, so I guess, a real good question here at the core of this is academia doesn't subscribe to this. Americans don't subscribe to it. They're just going to continue to do this. So really the question is, how do we, and it's not just America. This is like a Western plague, this viewpoint. It's in the halls and of bureaucracy, foreign policy bureaucracy in Great Britain, everywhere, except until you get to Poland and Austria, and then some of that worldview gets stunted. I'm serious, but all from Germany west, this is the foolishness that permeates the halls of our leaders and our foreign policy thinkers. How does this change? How does this change?
It doesn't.
Yeah,
it doesn't change.
Go ahead,
George.
Yeah, go ahead, George.
I think that's it. And this kind of, ideological zeal. I mean, you used to be able to say, well, the Americans, they have all this idea, manifest destiny, their view of themselves as, special people. But the Europeans are hard-nosed realists. They only focus on their own interests. None of that is true. I mean, the Europeans are just as much demented in their view of the world, as somehow values, that we have to spread values, as much as the Americans. So all this talk now, for instance, about the Afghan women and girls, why? What's the obligation towards Afghan women and girls? Well, there's no obligation. And as a matter of fact, the very fact that all these Afghan men who the Europeans have brought in, and these are all young men, so they've all basically grown up during the American era. what do? As soon as they get to Europe, they start sexually assaulting women. So in other words, all of this great adventure of doing something for the Afghan women and Afghan girls, well, hasn't reached anywhere. It hasn't achieved anything, and it's ridiculous to believe that somehow it is up to the West to free Afghan women. It really isn't. I mean, it's their country, their society, their tradition, their religion. They have to work it out for themselves. There's no, we don't have an obligation. That's the white man's burden to go around liberating others.
Unfortunately, George and I have fortunately, George and I have a very keen understanding of the history of the Soviet Union and what happened there. I mean, their God failed. The ideology failed them.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what we're having a repeat of. Okay. We're having a repeat of it because there's no introspection. I mean, as Brezhnev said when dealing with Czechoslovakia in 1968, the gains of socialism will never be withdrawn. Never. Okay. Ever. And this is the same kind of mindset. I mean, up until a few days ago, there was the American flag on the embassy in Kabul with Black Lives Matter. Okay? Do I need to say more?
Yeah. And so, ultimately, this is whether they want to acknowledge it or not, this is a game, international relations is a game of relative power and pursuit of interest. Where does the U.S. and its allies end up now 20 years later? Are we relatively more powerful before we invaded Afghanistan than we are now? And that is for me, that's the only question. That's the only question that matters, because I sadly think you're probably right, cynical as it is. How many more John Mearsheimers have to write The Tragedy of Great Power Politics?
There you go.
Right? I mean,
there you go.
It's out there, guys. It's out there. So you're either smart enough to understand it or not. I mean,
right. And I think that's
basically
that goes to the
go ahead,
heart
George. Go ahead.
of any writer on great power politics will tell you great powers only remain great powers as long as they stay out of wars.
Yeah.
How is the fastest way to cease being a great power? Keep fighting wars, because that's
George.
That's it. So therefore, any prudential power politics is you stay out of wars, and above all, you don't get yourself into confrontations with other great powers. That's the worst thing you can do.
Also, to be a great power is you have to make things that people want to buy. Okay. And so, in my lifetime, the whole world bought American television sets. No, there's no American television manufacturer left right now. I could go on and on and on. See, the hollowing out. See, this is what's so bizarre and contradictory. I mean, their imperial ambitions have no bounds, but it's not based on anything. You're not making anything. And on top of it, what's truly bizarre is that you have a political class that sees half the country as the enemy. Okay, that doesn't happen in China. That doesn't happen in Russia. Okay, yeah. George and I have talked endlessly about how figures in during the revolution, the Russian Civil War, it was contentious. A lot of people died. It was vicious. It was bloody. And a lot of those leaders are being rehabilitated in the name of unity, not diversity and not equity. Okay, we have a common, difficult history together, and that brings people together. I mean, the U.S. is doing everything opposite to maintain its power. It's insane to watch.
Benedict Anderson, shared communities, shared glory, shared suffering.
Imagine communities.
Imagine communities. Yes, thank you. Imagine community. Thanks for clarifying that. And I mean, what would these people say? It's like, so now you know the equation. Are you intentionally trying to dilute it? Like, what are you doing here? So you know the equation for a strong nation. Are you intentionally trying to destroy that? I mean, because I don't know how else you would. There's no other rational explanation. I can't find one. And after all, 20 years later, $2 trillion later, 5,000 American lives later, 4,000 dead, God knows how many maimed, and countless other people. How many metric tons of opium exported later? I mean, all of this later, and what do you think is going to happen with? I mean, this is an enormous opportunity for our enemies because we basically just got bloodlet for 2 decades.
Well, I think
What
that's
we have
Baited and
here,
bled,
hang on,
baited and
George,
bled.
hang on here.
Yeah, go ahead,
What
Peter.
we have here, we have ideology trumping reality. That's one of the reasons the Soviet Union collapsed. Ideology trumped reality. And when by the time they realized that, it was endgame. Sorry, George.
Yeah, I'll just say we're hitting on a lot of good books during this. 2 hours got a lot of good books in there. That one's Ken Waltz, Man, State, and War, baby. Tell you that.
That's the thing, but that's the thing. I mean, when you have ideological,
Love it.
the ideologues are, those who don't really think in terms of consolidating power. I mean, if you go back to the Soviet era, you have, the Trotskyists who are sort of thinking in terms of, well, world revolution, and then you have the realists, who were around Stalin, who says, well, you're not going to have any world revolution if we're going to dissipate Soviet power. So it's a matter of, consolidate. What you do is you consolidate power. So you have the same kind of mentality of those that say, well, we've got to embark on this venture and that venture. And they're not even thinking about you. Every time you do this, you are weakening the power of the base. You're weakening the imperial power. You get yourself involved in Syria, the net benefit is minimal, but the losses are colossal. Because again, it's huge amounts of money, huge, casualties. So, 20 years in Afghanistan, how much money was spent? How many lives were lost? The achievement is nil. I mean, what have you achieved? And the only thing people say, well, we did all this for women. Well, what did you do for women? I mean, it's like, so you didn't do anything very much. I mean, it's gone in a puff of smoke.
Yeah, I'd argue we did worse, honestly. I mean, because there are going to be, this is going back 19 years, 18 years now. But I remember a woman in Kabul, she wanted to open a hair salon, basically like a modern hair salon. She was not allowed during the Taliban. She had tried, and the Taliban had, retaliated against her. And it was a big thing when Americans, and the Allies took Kabul. It was this big thing, and she opened up her doors. It was this whole spiel. I would argue that we made it worse because now maybe they leave, maybe they don't. But I can't imagine everybody is going to get out that wanted to be, as Western as possible. That's just not going to happen. And they'll clamp down even more. But really going back to what you said, George, and Peter, you led into it, really. This is basic stuff we're talking about here. Basic, very basic INR kind of thing. The cost of war is great. It's great.
Yes.
Nothing can take down a great power faster than engaging in war, which is why it should always be the last choice. There are other strategies to confront enemies, opponents, competitors. There are other strategies to do it. In war, the use of a total, out-and-out conflict should be the last one. And it seems like the United States, less so its allies, but they definitely are too, we just keep getting baited and then bled out. Baited and then bled out.
Going back to something we said earlier, I keep coming back into the conversation, but and I'm kind of missed some bits and pieces. But I mean, given what we've seen, how the elites are going to react to the debacle in Afghanistan, is that when you look at, particularly since the end of the Cold War, the U.S. has punched down on countries that cannot fight back.
Yeah.
If they want to pick a fight with Russia or China, they will fight back. Yeah. I can guarantee you that. Okay, that's why it's when an empire is wounded, an empire is dangerous.
Right, but I think it's also very interesting that if you look at American history, I mean, the people who led America were very, very smart, and they didn't do what the Europeans did, which was to get themselves into war and impoverish themselves. So America actually rose to be a great power and eventually the number one power by actually staying out of wars. I mean, the other day, the British went back to their complaints about, oh, America, we had to wait 3 years before America got into World War One, had to wait 2 years before they got into World War II. Yeah, because the Americans were smart. Why lose blood and treasure, fighting it out
for Poland.
Yeah, on the field of
For
Flanders.
Poland, Alsace-Lorraine, sliver of land in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. You get into the war at the moment when all the land, all the goodies are being divvied out. That's when you get in. Same with this World War II. I mean, the Britain got themselves into this mess of their own making in World War II. Americans stayed out, and that's how you play great power politics. Yeah. Fortunately, and I think here's the influence of the neocons and the Democrats, and particularly the Johnson Kennedy administrations. They lost that. They forgot that lesson and how what Americans used to do in order to project power, and got themselves into this massive, in Vietnam, but then subsequently all the other involvement, which was exactly the wrong thing to do. How you dissipate power, and it went against what America had been doing throughout its history.
You want to add to that, Peter? Because Dan, that was a good point. I got it. And you know what they always say, Peter? They always say, well, the world got more integrated, more intertangled, right? And there was, more not competition, interdependence. Their word they love.
No.
Go ahead, speak to that.
That's a nonsense thesis. What's very interesting, and George and I have talked about this a lot, is that the whole concept of globalization. The U.S. took the wrong lesson. They financialized everything. Other countries, particularly China, they industrialized using globalization. No, and the world is more intertwined, and we all know each other better, and that's why we'll get along. No, when someone in Afghanistan says they're told a man can get pregnant, no. Okay, you tell people in Russia a man can get pregnant. Nope, not on for that. Nope. I'll go to McDonald's and KFC, but I don't believe in that nonsense. No, this globalization of this ideology is alienating the vast majority of the world.
Yeah, that's another great point too. That there will be a point where we're just thought that it gets ridiculous. It just gets too ridiculous, and it happened with America and Britain. The Anglo-American relationship. Britain had just got a little too crazy for America at some point, and they would later look at us like barbarians because we didn't want to come into the new era with them, right? And our founders mocked them for that stuff, and later Americans mocked them for that. I mean, John Adams, said, I don't know what's wrong with them. They're just so effeminate. I don't know what's going on. He literally wrote that back when he was, he was a worse ambassador known to man because he wasn't tactful like Franklin at all. Where Franklin was like, take your time, woo the French, woo the British. And that was not John Adams. He was like, I'm here to do business, and I need to know how many ships you're going to give me, or I'm going home. Adams was a very different person. But he got home, and he attributed it to them just being completely out of touch with natural law and completely out of touch with their roots. And they talk about a forgotten lesson, right? And now that people in this foreign policy establishment would mock the old thinking of the pre-best and the brightest. I don't remember who brought it up, but the Kennedy administration, the best and the brightest. We're not going to be asymmetrical anymore. We're going to have a symmetrical response. We're going to bring a nice finesse to this thing. It was always a joke, a total joke, and that got lost along the way. And it's nowhere. It has no voice. Original Americanism has no voice anymore in corporate media at all. So, we're the only ones having this conversation, gentlemen. Believe that. We are the only ones having this conversation.
But see, do you see how unhealthy hegemony is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
When you have a great power competition, it makes you stronger.
Yep.
Hegemony makes you inherently weaker. Okay, and that's what we have seen. I mean, and what have we gotten for it? I just, look, what's going on? I've been telling people, I was on the Jimmy Dore show a few years ago, and I was explaining to them, I said, the more using the dollar and sanctions to maintain hegemony, well, more people will leave the dollar. Okay, George and I did a separate video on how the British bank they confiscated Venezuela's gold. I mean, then who wants to go put their money in the Bank of England? I mean, get it confiscated. I mean, they debase everything. Things that should be stand alone, like an exchange system. Okay, and then the U.S. has sanctioned the vast majority of the countries in the world. And what has happened? The Russians and the Chinese trade in their own currencies. The Indians start doing it with Iran. Everyone's going to start doing it. The single most powerful weapon the U.S. has had in the post-war era is the dollar, and they're shredding it every passing day.
I think Jimmy Dore is probably my favorite left-wing show. I think he is.
Mine too.
Yeah,
Mine too.
I really enjoy his show. It's just he doesn't come across to me as unreasonable, and he seems to keep his foundation where a lot of people just especially you can see that the Trump era was a good opportunity for people like him to prove that, and not too many did, right? So
well, yeah. I mean, I told Jimmy, before we started the interview, I said, I know how you feel about Democrats, and I said that's how I feel about Republicans, so we have something in common.
And going to your original point, then the unilateral system, right, of looking at the world, it could be multi, pre-Cold War, multi, and then we had basically a bilateral system with the USA and the Soviet Union, and then after that fell, the Cold War happened. He'll come back. I know he will, but I really wanted his take on this. I'll get this from you too, George. After the Cold War, the U.S. really got too big for its britches. And it really decided that, maybe there can be a global hegemon. And maybe we can be it. And Peter's back, so I want him to hear this. But Peter, I'll get George's take and then I'll get yours. But, at the post-Cold War era, you had good, healthy competition between the U.S. and Russia. And then after Russia fell, the U.S. got too big for its britches and really started to delude itself into thinking there could be a singular global hegemon, and it just was never real. So do you think it was just never real, or the United States screwed it up? I mean, I think I know what you're going to say, but is it possible and the U.S. just handled it incorrectly?
It was real, and they did screw it up.
The thing was that
I'll come to you after, Peter. Go ahead, George. That's what I thought Peter was going to say.
Yeah, because once the Americans realized that hey, there's no one able to stop us, well, we can do what we like. And of course, it right. started off with its bombing of Yugoslavia. And thought, hey, this is a lot of fun. They didn't realize what the fury that this would arouse in Russia. They just didn't care. Hey, Russia's just too weak. Yeah, what the drunken fool Yeltsin? He's not going to do anything about it. But the Russians are just enraged because they just suddenly realize, this is how weak and pathetic we've become. That this is our little brother Serbia, and it's getting its head beaten in by the Americans. So so that caused basically the rise of Putinism. Yeah. And then of course you had the an invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time. I mean, it's not just, well, let's finish this war and then we'll go on to the next war. No, we'll do it at the same time, because we can do anything. So, yeah.
Then throw in Libya.
Exactly, yeah. And then,
throw in Libya. Yeah.
Standing as the world hegemon.
Go ahead, Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean,
throw in Libya,
this has been
right. Yeah.
Such a catastrophic. I mean, what great power? What another thing that makes a great power is that a great power learns from mistakes. Okay, and when you have a hegemonic moment, mistakes can come one after another. But because of your relative power position, you can absorb the mistakes. But at a certain point, there's a breaking point where. And then you alienate yourself on the international stage because you don't look reliable. You're prone to making mistakes. stakes, and people have to use assets and capital in the name of your very ill thought out ambitions. And one of the things that George and I have lamented, I mean, almost to the point of being just distraught, is that, the European Union, larger population than the United States, a very large economy that's not run very well, but it has a lot of assets, and it's something so peculiar among great powers because it's not standing up on its own. It should be a good competitor to China, to the United States. I think that would be very, very healthy. But what we had after the Second World War, building up an alliance against the Soviet Union, all these preferential trade deals that went all the way up to Trump. Okay, I mean, Europe was broke on its back. It was in rubble in 1945. And now it is a real competitor to the United States, and they still have these really easy trade deals that only gutted American industry. Okay, but the Cold War is over. The Soviet Union's gone. There's a new world out there. But it was only until Trump came to power and say, "Why are we still doing this?"
Yeah.
No, I think it's right. And these preferential deals because they thought, hey, in return for accepting our military dominance, in return for their following our foreign policy, our lead on NATO, we'll, give them this nice trade deals. And so when Trump said, hey, the Deutschmark is essentially undervalued, and the Germans have been very clever about using the euro as to be uncompetitive and to drive us out of business. And the Germans actually said, yeah, it's true. You're absolutely right. The euro is a nice little racket for Germany to undercut other countries' exports. So that's exactly same thing happened with Japan. I mean, in return for Japan accepting total subordination to the United States, basically we're just going to open up our market to Japanese goods, and we don't actually care whether we have access to the Japanese market. So all of that the case, but the consequence has also been that Europe has no foreign policy of its own. I mean, it's completely lost, all of their, their ability to project power that it once had before World War II, or at least in the immediate aftermath of World War II. That's why all this talk from Johnson and Macron about the European dimension is so ridiculous, because they have no idea how to project power. Last time they did it was the Suez in 1956, and it ended in a debacle. So all this talk, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I mean, it's a joke. They have no idea. They've been basically for decades and decades, they've been just doing what the Americans told them to do, and they have no idea what else to do.
George and I have been talking on the Gaggle. We know desperate to have a summit with Putin, and George and I, you like this, but we know that Putin doesn't have any respect for him. Why should I meet you? Who are you?
Who gives a damn?
You're no Churchill. You're no Thatcher.
Yeah, right. It's not even worth it to him at this point. It's just not. It's not even. And and I'll give my take on that. That was a great question I got, by the way, about the post Cold War era. And I think I'm with you guys, where I think it would have been possible, but they tried to turn the system into something it's not, something that's unnatural, and because they were afraid that it would become either a bi or multi-cameral system again. They wanted it all. It probably would have lasted longer had they just allowed nature to take its course. And it's not a bad thing if another regional hegemon does rise. It's a good thing because then you compete, and it's good for both. And that's what history shows. If putting aside Lindsey Graham's scary rhetoric about mad men creating that's nonsense. Nation-state actors are rational actors, and they make rational decisions. I don't believe in could there be a madman in charge of a regional power? I guess, guys. I mean, but that's just not how history works. It just look, if Kim Jong-il was such a madman, Peter and George, why didn't he lob something at somebody by now? I mean, this is crazy. Same thing with Iran. I'd argue the same thing down the line. Hitler was not a madman. He was encircled. It's textbook encirclement. And he figured I might as well expand my boundaries before I get sandwiched by other great powers on both my sides. This is like 20th century madness talk, guys. I mean, it just is not real.
No, I think that's right, and I think for instance, Kim Jong Un, who's like, oh, he's crazy, but of course he's not crazy. I mean, there's a reason why he has gone nuclear, and it should be fairly, straightforward to work out some kind of an agreement with
Yeah.
him. We know what he wants. He wants normalized relations,
Yeah.
and with the rest of the world. And he's ready. You have to bargain with him. He's gonna give up some things. He's gonna, you have to give up something. But the idea that just going up to him and say, well, you got to give up your nuclear weapons, and then that's it, and then maybe we'll talk with you.
Okay, George, remember Jen Psaki when she was what was it? Yeah. She was the State Department spokesman under Obama. Remember, there was a question from the media. How is this administration going to deal with nuclear power, North Korea? And she said, we don't recognize it as a nuclear power. See, this is this ideology. What?
Okay.
We don't recognize it as one.
Take
Okay?
another
So it doesn't
Valium,
have
Jen.
nuclear-
Take another Valium. Go back to your own world.
And she got promoted.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the scary thing. These people, we play musical chairs with these idiots, and they just keep coming back. Look at Floyd Austin. This is the guy who bungled Iraq. Now he's the Secretary of Defense. He's the one who could not secure with Joe Biden, by the way, a status of forces agreement, a single, simple provision in a status of forces agreement that is pretty much standard. I mean, this because if you're the Iraqis and you have domestic sentiment that is really against America at this point, and you're trying to hold and stay credible yourself as a regime, you look at the American government at that time, Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and you think, I don't have to give this up. These people aren't gonna. These out of here anyway. I have to deal with my domestic population and remain in power. And if it was somebody else, if it was a Donald Trump, it'd have been a different story. I do think, George, and I'll just wait for Peter to come back on the switch, but I do think if Donald Trump was reelected, we would have gotten progress with North Korea. I really do believe that, because Trump would have been a little bit more unleashed to do it. I mean, once the president's reelected, it's like, you know what, guys, I don't have to be a hard, on him anymore. I'm going to do what I think will be the man is going to live by and abide by the agreement. So I do think now North Korea is a potential new next crisis point because we're so destabilized when it really could have been a major success story and off the table. It could just have been take it off the table as a potential problem. Now, Peter brought up Taiwan. It could be anywhere now, and it's unfortunately one more concern instead of one less concern. And don't talk to Putin. I mean, yeah, that led to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That helps.
Idiots.
That helps.
I agree with you, Rich. I think that it looked to me like Trump, towards the end of his administration, had now learned not to rely on Bush holdovers and the usual military security types to implement his policy. I mean, he was basically he didn't want any more McMasters and Mattises and all the rest of them. So I think he would have worked out an agreement with Kim Jong Un without Bolton in the way, and I think he would have withdrawn from Syria as well. So no, I think that it's a great loss. I mean, I think that November the 3rd election, I think, was a major loss for the United States.
And if I can jump in here, Rich.
And the world. I mean, guys,
if I could
Abraham
jump,
is
George,
gone. Go ahead, Peter. Go ahead.
But one of the things that I really lament is that I think Trump is drawing the wrong conclusions from what's going on in Afghanistan right now. When he had a recent rally and he was telling, I sent the missiles in and I bombed them and I just thought, wow, you were right in the first place. Why are you going on the different path? You should be consistent in your message of ending forever wars. You show yourself as a courageous hero to the public. If you can say no to these people. No. That is your strength. And I think I think he's just completely muffed it here. I mean, just say, I am the hero, I am the guy with courage, and I say no to these people. I say no to these people for you.
Yeah, and you could still do that, maintain your dignity, maintain your integrity, and still look masculine and tough, because you could. It's an impossible thing for them to prove otherwise if he simply just says, I would have made it more stable. That's it. It would have been easier, but we still would have got out. It's the right thing to do, but I would have made it more stable for the following reasons. It's impossible for Joe Biden to disprove that statement. So it doesn't matter, or any Democrat. So it doesn't really matter. He doesn't have to put himself in the position of making himself look again like he would have lobbed a couple missiles. And I got to tell you, in Minnesota and in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, not so much, but in Michigan and Minnesota and some other parts in battleground states we polled before the election, because of Robert Barnes, we asked the question, who do you trust more to keep us out of a new foreign entanglement, from new war? And in some places, it was either close or slightly more for Biden. Not in most of these places. In Ohio, Pennsylvania, they picked Donald Trump, and by a big margin. Pennsylvania, Florida, Iowa, they picked Trump, down the line. But in some of these states that were close last time and I always thought could have been won, they didn't have the right message from him. Minnesota did not realize that he was the anti-war candidate, and that is a failure. There's no other way around it, because if you didn't convince the voters of something that you stand for, that's on you. That's on nobody else. That's on you. And he seems to be struggling with learning some lessons, guys. There's just no doubt about it. And I do think toward the end of his administration, it was getting better with selections of who to pick. I mean, come on, your first Secretary of State. Let's see. Who do we ask? Condoleezza Rice? Does that seem like it comports with your 2016 platform? No. And then for Attorney General, even. I mean, he gets a Bush appointment. I mean, that came straight from younger Bush's mouth when they had the funeral for Poppy Bush. He visited the White House, and George W. Bush suggested that he choose William Barr. I mean, this is just crazy. You know what? And George, oh, good, George's coming back, because this is the last question. I don't want to keep you guys forever. I did go a little late because we started late. But last question to you guys, which is a great lead into it. There is some similarities here between Donald Trump and Richard Nixon, is there not? How he just wanted to, I don't know, he wanted people to like him, right? So I want both your takes on this, because I know you guys are history buffs too. I think just parallels with me. I can't shake. Go first, George. Go ahead.
It's very, very interesting, because Pat Buchanan wrote his book, the first volume of his account of Nixon, just then, I think in 2017. And I think he meant then that it's no good winning an election if you don't have the people around you who are going to get their hands around the government. Yeah. And that in effect what happened with Nixon, because he didn't get his hands around the government. He had very limited control. And so and again, Nixon's policies were resisted from within the administration. I mean, his détente policy was resisted. His withdrawal from Vietnam was resisted. So he was continually at war with his own people, and he didn't have, other than Pat Buchanan, he didn't really have anyone who's kind of on his wavelength. So I think it's the real parallels with basically Trump got in, but he didn't really think about what's the next step, which is I've got to get my hands around the government. I need to have my own people, my own team who are going to be implementing a Trumpian agenda. And so for him to think that McMaster or Tillerson or Mattis, Bolton had any interest at all in implementing a Trumpian agenda, I mean, it was staggeringly naive.
And Peter, didn't he have this sense? And I know Peter's coming back, so he had this sense, like, it's weird because they had two very different backgrounds. Nixon was from nothing, and he hated, even though he worked himself through the professional class and Ivy League ranks, he wanted recognition for that, and they never accepted him. But he always felt, you know what, I did everything you did. I could do everything you could do. You were not bred. So Nixon had this idea like, you were not bred better than me, you know? And he wanted that, bothered him. And with Trump, it was not a similar background. Trump wasn't born super rich like he ended up, but he wasn't born poor. I mean, he got a loan from his old man to start things. I mean, he was not born like like I was born in a working class suburb, of the 5 boroughs. He was born in to a father who was a developer in Queens. So he just had the vision to redo Manhattan, which nobody wanted to touch that real estate at that point. So what do you think about that? I'll throw it to you, Peter. I mean, 2 men, very different backgrounds, but ultimately get into the same position and struggle because of the same reasons, and the same, like, downfalls almost, like, I want to be liked. I want to be respected by this group of people who will never respect you. Peter, that's for you.
Yeah, the interesting thing, the interesting thing for me, well, Trump was obviously the ultimate outsider, but when it comes to Nixon, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, he clawed his way up. I mean, you can never say that Nixon wasn't a hard worker. Okay,
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan didn't work hard. Joe Biden doesn't work hard. I can't say much about Trump. We'll find out. But I mean, here's a person that really wanted the ultimate achievement, and I think because of his lust for power and for success, he made very serious mistakes. Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think also, I think I think Nixon was naive. Is that he did have a core following, very much like Trump, but there were a lot, like Rockefeller Republicans that never liked Dick Nixon. Okay, and he and also the media, because Nixon never had a good relationship with the media. Same thing with Donald Trump. Okay, Tricky Dicky, that goes all the way back to what, 64 gubernatorial campaign.
Right.
And you know what? He was Tricky Dicky. He did some really nasty stuff to people. Okay,
But I think
so.
I think so. But I just on that, with the Nixon, I mean, ultimately you have to say Nixon. They went after Nixon for things that his predecessors had done. I mean, he didn't do anything that Kennedy didn't do. He didn't do anything.
No kid. That's true. That's true. Absolutely.
But they had the media. He didn't have the Justice Department. So in other words, he never controlled, just like Trump. He never controlled the Justice Department. So they could go after him, and he was unable to control. I mean, Obama always had control of the Justice Department. He had his wingman, the Attorney General there, and he would always control any kind of an investigation. But that was the thing. I mean, that Nixon, I think, felt very bitter that he was being persecuted for doing things that all his predecessors had done. So really, any attempt to present Nixon, which I think the liberal media or academics present, where he was singularly evil, he did things that no one else did, it's just simply untrue. He didn't. He wasn't singularly evil. He was ruthless, as were his predecessors and his successors. They were all very ruthless politicians.
Yeah, but the fact that he came back after an 8-year hiatus, because I was brought up in a Republican family, and my father worshipped Richard Nixon. I mean, really.
Yeah.
I mean, my father was alive during Ronald Reagan, but he didn't have the same kind of connection to Reagan, because Reagan was just the antithesis of the Democrats, but not with Nixon. Nixon wasn't the antithesis to Humphrey in my father's mind. He was against the Eastern Seaboard establishment. I mean, have we heard this here before?
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
I think that's the point. Stephen Ambrose, who wrote the biography of Nixon, he said when Nixon made his Checkers speech, that was in 1952, when it looked like at the end of his political career, he touched a nerve with the public. I mean, that public, everyone
never going to see me again.
Nixon's Checkers speech, but the public was really moved by it when he talks about his wife's cloth coat. She doesn't wear mink; she wears a cloth coat. The public loved it, and I think that's why, Peter, your father probably responded in the same way. That,
the ultimate underdog,
really had
right,
a kind
Peter?
of a man of the people approach.
That's right. The ultimate underdog, beaten down constantly by machine.
Yeah, but I mean, when he campaigned, great. I mean, he was saying, the way America, in Johnson's America, he said, this is not the country that we inherited, and we need to take it back. I mean, it really is kind of a glimmer of very much what Trump was trying to say. Very much so. I mean, the parallels are very, very interesting. And even though Nixon was an ultimate insider in the party, in many ways, he wasn't liked by the party. Okay.
That's such a that's
and
such
the
a good.
Republicans, what a lot of Republicans forget is that when when Nixon went to the wall for Barry Goldwater, I mean, really, and the Republican base remembered that. He was the only guy that went around the country.
That's exactly it.
The former vice president. He had leather shoes there, and he went out. How many big Republicans did that? Nobody. The Rockefeller Republicans, they held their nose.
They wanted Goldwater to lose. Rockefeller and Romney. Again.
And Romney, yes, good old George.
They wanted Goldwater to lose,
without a doubt.
As Mitt is exactly, a chip off the old block. Mitt and George. I mean, that was that exactly the same thing. They wanted Goldwater to lose, whereas Nixon, he just said, "Hey, Goldwater is the nominee. I'm doing the good, loyal party thing. I'm campaigning for the official nominee."
Another thing that's very important about the Nixon presidency that most people forget is that look at the environment. EPA came into existence under Nixon. What Nixon was, he saw what he did was he looked at the lay of the land, and he saw issues that were very important to people, and he was brilliant in saying, all right, we'll let you have it, but I will design it and I will control it. He was brilliant at doing that. Okay, it was very progressive in a way.
It was,
a lot more progressive
but the
than people ever
true
give
word,
credit for.
but the true meaning of the word progressive, because we did have folks. I mean, most are probably too young to have been around, but there was a problem with smog in the major cities in this country, and he reacted to it. I mean, that was an everyday American concern. It wasn't just the concern of the gentrified liberal. It wasn't. So, and by the way, Florida Republicans have been very good at carrying Nixon's mantra on the environment. They're green, but in the right way. So, Republicans are the outdoorsy people. They're the ones who care about the health of their bass fishing population. Democrats know nothing about the environment. They just talk about it, but they don't really know about it. They don't live in it. They don't react, right? They don't interact with it. And Florida Republicans have been good with that, carrying on Nixon's, without letting it get to be something it's not. Because by ignoring it and mocking people like AOC, we all know the woman's an idiot. But she's the only one speaking to people about these issues on the national stage. You don't give an option or an alternative to people. Don't laugh when she gets all the attention on the issue and people are listening to her, because she's at least giving some. That's something Florida Republicans have taught us. Don't let them counter it. There's no reason to let them corner the market on him being pro-environmental. Jeb Bush, one of the few things he did good was save some habitats that were important to outdoors kind of Republicans. Of course you want to do that. Fighting coastal issues. Of course you want to do that. I mean, these are who has all the votes, and come on. Pay attention.
I think also that EPA, OSHA is also
which just got out of control, guys.
And again, I mean, Nixon also cultivated organized labor. I remember in 1972, AFL-CIO did not endorse McGovern. I mean, it's unheard of for AFL-CIO.
And the Teamsters backed Nixon.
The Democratic Party, exactly. The Teamsters, the Democratic Party nominee. I mean, they didn't endorse Nixon, but that was a huge triumph for Nixon for the AFL-CIO to refuse to endorse the Democratic nominee.
Without a doubt.
So yeah, I mean, that, he was always much more of a populist. I mean, Reagan wasn't really a populist. I mean, whatever he's much more of a kind of, tax cuts and the rest of it. But he didn't pursue a genuinely populist economic policy in the way that Nixon did.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I know we have Peter cutting in and out, but I know he'll pop back in. But it is 1:20. I carried you guys way over anyway. So eventually the generator guys are going to ask me to come out and inspect their work. So listen, George, if Peter doesn't come back on, tell people where they can find you guys. For those of you who didn't see my interview with them, it's fantastic, but it's also very indicative of the show that they have over there. Robert and I have told you guys many times to go check it out. Fantastic show. Tell them where to find you, George.
We are on thegaggle.locals.com.
There it is.
Thegaggle.locals.com.
Everyone's got to get their little Barnes in. I mean, he's the gold standard in locals channels. But yeah, and there's still stuff on YouTube. You could always check that out. But definitely, if you want to support him, locals is it. And if Peter doesn't come back, which it doesn't look like he's able to do, give him my best, George. I got to thank you guys so much for coming on.
Yeah. This was a lot of fun, and I hope, Richard, we can make this a regular thing. Next time you come on our show and so on. I think it's a lot of fun. I think we get a lot out of these discussions, and I think it's great. I think for our followers and everyone on the locals community. So I think it's I'm hoping that this will become a kind of a regular feature.
Yeah, I'm 100% in support of that, George. I am. This was a great show for my viewers. It was a lot of information that they needed to hear. And yeah, let's get Laura on board for that, Mrs. Schedule Maker, and let's put it on the calendar. Let's make it happen. All right.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to that.
All right. All the best, George.
Thank you.
All the best. Talk to you soon, and give Peter my best as well.
Absolutely. See you soon. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye. All right. That was George and Peter from the Gaggle. Guys, incredible show. That was a great show. Inside the Numbers today was great. I really can't thank them enough for coming on. That was we needed it. And I am dead serious when I say this is not a conversation. What you just heard is not a conversation you're going to hear anywhere else. Unless, of course, you go and check out the Gaggle. But I mean, basics of international relations theory, the basics of security studies. We have cast them aside for a crazy worldview that produces the chaos that you see because it's not real. It's based off of assumptions that are not real. It operates under assumptions that you can just ignore the natural order. You cannot. How things have been forever. You cannot. There is no international norm. There is no democratic realism. There is no neoconservative worldview that will ever work. And that goes for liberal internationalism. The book we cited before, Tragedy of Great Power Politics, do you know how long it takes John Mearsheimer to destroy the worldview of everyone from Susan Rice to Joe Biden to George W. Bush to Bill Kristol? About 2 pages. It's a joke. It's laughed out of INR academia. They can't even defend it as a thesis. And the running joke is, if you can't defend your thesis, that's all right, just go work at the State Department. We've had 2 presidents in the modern era who ever tried to bring back some form, some semblance of realism, which is sanity. And that's it. The rest of them have really got underway under Bill Clinton, and it has been crazy talk from there on out. All right, a couple show things, and then we'll go. Locals, keep an eye out for live stream. Want to talk more about California. All right, that's number 1. Number 2, speaking of, the new thing for the Public Polling Project is up because I want to give enough time to make sure I don't want to be funding in a pinch like we did last time, even though it happened. Generic ballot time. It is generic ballot time. I want a generic ballot. I'm kicking myself for not putting it on the last one. But it is definitely generic ballot time. All right. What else? I have a speech I'm going to give. When it gets a little closer, I'll remind you. There's no point in talking about it now, but I'll be speaking before Governor Ron DeSantis, in fact. All right. On polling and whether or not it's relevant anymore in this society. And you'll just have to wait and see. All right, but what else? Let's see. I think that's about it. All right, I'll tweet Bannon. I think, keep your eye on my feed. I think I got all appearances. Of course, we'll have Matt Brainerd on Friday, or somebody from his organization, to discuss the results of DC versus the national numbers when it comes to views toward the January 6th protesters. All right, we still haven't gotten to that yet, and we will, even though they have the information, we will, and we'll talk about that. All right, and of course, we'll have Don Smith on Friday. All right, and down the line, Valor's been booking a lot more people too, which is good. This is good. This was good. All right, and in between the polling shows, it's time to debate other ideas and views. And I think this, like George said, make this a more commonplace thing. I think you'll get a lot out of it. This will not be the last foreign policy disaster of the Joe Biden administration. I am very concerned. If you look at the material we were just talking about, real conventional wisdom, as in like empirically supported academic research conventional wisdom, would tell you that it's the beginning and that we should expect to see more instability because the administration will seek to prove their bona fides and they will seek to make have some kind of a symmetrical response somewhere in the world, and they will look stupid because that is what happens all of the time. Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter. You subscribe to this worldview, you look like an ass. Because it's not real. Because these things don't exist. With that said, I'm going to go. Follow me on Getter. I'm on Getter now. At People's Pundit on Getter. And of course, best way you can follow us on what we do, join the data revolution. Join the revolution in data journalism. One day I'll get my own damn right pitch. I'll get my pitch right. All right, and join up on Locals. peoplespundit.locals.com. peoplespundit.locals.com. Be a part of how we make the surveys. Have a say in what goes into the surveys. Get some of my best ideas from the Locals community. Of course, if you're not joining Locals and you just contribute to the Public Polling Project, which you can do in the description section, the link is there. Do put your comments. I should have mentioned that when I first brought it up. Do put your comments, and we read every single one of them. For those of you who very much want a Bitcoin, I don't know how to make that work right now. And the moral of the story, or the goal here, is to be as transparent as possible. So I don't know how to attach that to a Bitcoin wallet or something and then exchange right now, which is not possible with the program that we're using, which is really just a plugin, WordPress Give. All right. The idea is to be as transparent as possible. And until they integrate that, figure out how that works, and then I can figure out how to put a value, a steady value. There's multiple things to attack there. So we'll work on it. But I know some people are like, look, I don't really want to donate to PayPal. I get that, but we're in a bit of a box here. Choose credit card or credit card option or something, and that'll send you through Stripe, which is no better in many cases. But again, we have to operate in the construct that has been built for us, even though we are working from within it to push back on it. All right? With that, I think I'm good. Great show. Thanks again to my guests, Peter and George. Look forward to doing it again. Check out the Gaggle when you can. If you didn't see my episode, go back and check it out. That is very indicative of what you can find there. Just fantastic conversation. All right, look, I'm out like Trout. I'll see you guys soon. Locals, keep an eye on the board, guys. Keep an eye on the board. Thanks for joining.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you don't